Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup. I'm your humble host, D-Bays, which is talent on loan from Kolob. My crew and I, we ruminate weekly on the great and spacious beehive. So thanks so much for joining us to discuss the current events in Mormondom. We've got a big episode for you. This is Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2023. It's episode 97. The Mormon Church humanitarian donation has been rejected. It's very controversial. You're not going to want to miss what we are going to bring to you on that one. The LDS Church, there's been a fraudster who's been convicted of defrauding people for $500 million. This is a big article, and a lot of the mainstream media, they're not covering it, but we are. And finally, the LDS Church's investment arm, which is called Ensign Peak Advisors, it's been accused of supporting Hamas. Yeah, we've got a lot of controversial stuff to bring to you. This is going to be a fantastic episode. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm at www.MormonNewsRoundup.org, or you can send me an email to kolob@MormonNewsRoundup.org. I'd like to invite onto the program my fabulous co-host, Glen. Glen, how's it going?
Fabulous, I believe. That's what I heard. Yeah.
Tremendous. Now, Glen, what is your 1 minute Mormon story? Who are you and what are you all about?
I podcast over at Infants on Thrones. I've been in the podcasting world, amateur podcaster really, for about 13 years. Started in 2010 with Mormon Expression. I was academically trained as a folklorist. I wrote a book called Bathing with God a couple of years ago. I guess if there's something important to know about me, it's that I think that every single thing is a fiction. It's all incomplete. Nobody has the full picture of the story. We're all bits and pieces of it. And fictions are absolutely valuable, contrary to what I think people mostly believe. I think everything is a fiction. Everything should be approached that way. And I'm really interested in the creators of the fictions that are being expressed to me. So I like asking a lot of questions to finding out about the people that I'm interacting with, because what they think, their subjective reality about things, is far more important to me than anything else. So that's what I'm really curious about.
Well, Glen, you should fit right in here because most people accuse the Mormon News Roundup of being fake news. So that fits perfectly well in with your world mindset. You're literally the first person that I ever reached out to co-host. So it's been 97 episodes, and I think I finally wore you down. I mean, you've recorded something like
that's what happened, actually.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty good at that. Now, you've recorded 800 episodes with Infants on Thrones, which, by the way, how do you like my background here, Glen?
That's fantastic. It's amazing. I appreciate all the time and effort that you put into getting that painted on the wall in your bedroom. It must have taken a while.
Yeah, I'm just using CGI, but seriously,
oh, really?
Yeah. Now, I spent all week listening to Infants on Thrones. I don't know if you make honorary infants, but that's what I'm hoping that you'll crown me at the end. But I understand that, if one episode is probably not enough to get invited to be an infant on a throne. But
you are an infant on a throne already, Dives. And yeah, I'd love to have you come on and we can, but then we dive into you. And I don't know if you're going to want that or not, but we'll see. I'd love for you to come on.
So, Glen, our first news article this week in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a thanks but no thanks. A Native American museum has returned the LDS Church's $2 million gift. So the church was involved there in Oklahoma in it was called the First Peoples Museum there, and they donated $2 million. It was kind of a quid pro quo. We're going to donate $2 million to your museum if you let us put a family history center inside the church and let us staff it by full-time Mormon missionaries. But that's been rejected and returned to the church. It's kind of unprecedented to see an organization, usually museums and nonprofits, they're usually strapped for cash. So accepting a $2 million donation, I mean, that seems like a no-brainer, but we're seeing the church get rejected here in a very public way. And it's also in a manner that I had not necessarily seen before. What do you think about the Native American Museum telling the church thanks but no thanks on your $2 million?
I don't think it's thanks but no thanks on the $2 million. I think it's thanks but no thanks to the strings that are attached to the $2 million. Good for them. I'm glad they've got their principles. They say, you know what, actually, $2 million isn't worth it.
There are going to be a lot of strings attached along with this. And I got this video here from one of my favorite YouTubers out there, which is Julia from Analyzing Mormonism. And she actually served a full-time missionary as a full-time missionary in one of these family search centers. Wow. And she gives us a quick perspective on what it means to her to have been a full-time missionary in one of these centers and see the church's money get rejected. Let me play this for you, Glenn, and get your reaction.
In 2021, the church donated $2 million to the First American Museum in Oklahoma. This donation was specifically for a family search center that would potentially be staffed with LDS missionaries. I myself served my mission in a family search visitor center that used to exist in Park City, Utah. Concerning this $2 million donation, the prophet Russell M. Nelson said, "The gift from the church will strengthen Native American and other families by creating within the museum a family search center. This center will make it possible for visitors to the museum to receive help in preserving personal histories, searching for ancestors, and building their own family trees." However, the museum opened in September of 2021, and there is no family history center. It turns out that the museum returned the $2 million to the church. On their website, they responded as follows. The agreement between the First Americans Museum and the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints related to a grant in the amount of $2 million for the creation of a family history research center will be discontinued. FAM will return the grant funds and will suspend plans to develop the center until further notice. We thank the church for their understanding and generosity. FAM values the perspectives of our Native constituencies. Thank you to those who voiced concerns in a respectful manner about the project. I wonder what those concerns were. Could it be that the church has actively sought to change Native American history? Or that they heavily mistreated the Native Americans in early church history? Could it be the Indian placement program? Is it because the church would seek to proselytize at the museum? Who knows? And if this is indeed a case of problematic history between the church and the Native Americans, I'm proud of them for sticking up for themselves.
What do you think those strings were that were attached associated with this, Glenn?
That kind of cultural appropriation of reframing their heritage. I mean, the Mormon Church view of Native American heritage, I don't think is very in line with what's real or what's their actual heritage is. So
yeah, so you mean to tell me that there's no such thing as Lamanites? Because that's what's going to happen when you have people coming into this museum, is that they're going to say, okay, let's look at our family history. And they're going to say, oh, your family history, you're Shoshone, you're whatever your tribe is. No, that's not your history. Your history is actually contained in this book right here, this Book of Mormon. Let me give that to you. Yeah. And you need to abandon your cultural heritage. It's a very colonial mindset. And that's why the website says that they respected the persons who were involved with it and the pushback that they got from their communities. By the way, I did grow up in Oklahoma, not that far from this particular museum. And I find it to be very remarkable that, we're in 2023 now. People understand, especially with the DNA connections in the Book of Mormon, that persons of Native American ancestry, they derive mostly from Asia, from the Mongolia area. They don't derive from a Hebrew ancestry. They're the vast majority of them did not come across on transoceanic submarines in 2000 BC or in 600 BC on ships. And that's why we're getting a lot of pushback in this particular case. And what I also find remarkable about this is that, the church does these PR laps. They take these victory laps with all of their donations. And then we don't come to find out that some of them have been returned. They don't announce that on the church's website. They always take the credit for it, but they never say, oh, yeah, and then it was rejected because they didn't want our Mormon missionaries in there and they didn't want our incredible colonial mindset. We only get the one half of the story, and we have to learn about the rejections from other news sources. It's just very ironic.
Self-serving. I mean, it makes sense to me. That's kind of what the church is and what the church does. I served my mission in Japan in the early 90s. And this idea of cultural appropriation became, I don't know, that was where I first really faced it as a missionary, as I was knocking on doors trying to get people to change from whatever their traditional heritage was to the real one, the true one. And then I would see all the conflicts that people would have when they would join the church and their family would reject them. And of course, people in the church would bring them in and wrap their arms around them, and they felt like they had community, and that was nice and great, but it came at a cost because they had to reject their heritage. One of the things that was really interesting to me, I was always fascinated with the lost tribes of Israel. And when I was in the MTC, we were told that the Japanese were the lost tribes of Israel. And they started looking at all these different clues and signs. And so when I did my master's thesis in folklore, I focused on the Japanese being the lost tribes of Israel. And what I found as I was interviewing people, talking to them about these stories, why is it important that you feel like you are the lost tribes of Israel? What I discovered is it was because they felt like instead of rejecting the faith of their Shinto Buddhist fathers, they were reclaiming the original lost faith that, like the apostasy had pushed out. And it was just this really interesting exploration of individual identity and group identity and all these different things that go into these fictions and these stories that are created that really provide real value to these people's lives. So I applaud the museum for saying, no, we don't want our history retold or recreated, especially within the walls of our museum. We don't want to be told, hey, do you want to know where your ancestors really came from, Shoshone? Do you want to know the real history of your people? Because we'll tell you, because we know what the people at the museum don't know. No, I'm sorry. We don't need that. You can keep your $2 million. I applaud that.
Right. And also, you're going to give us your name so that we can baptize you and your ancestors proxy. And we're going to make your heritage into Mormons via proxy. It's those type of things that Julia brought up, that we've also brought up, that are that people know that the jig is up. And this crazy thing, Glenn, is this is not the first time this has happened. The church donated back in 2019. Donated $2 million to the International African American Museum to have a family search in there as well. And you'll see David Bednar and some other folks here hobnobbing, taking a victory lap. You know, they're saying, hey, we're giving you all this money, and everyone's so thankful for it. And guess what? It appears also, Glenn, that this one hasn't been reported, but if you call this museum here, if you call them and ask them for the Family History Center in there, it's not in this one either. Which makes me kind of believe that, you know, when the church tries to make these donations to different people, see, here's the fist bump. We're taking a victory lap. And then they never tell us, oh, oops.
I want to see Bednar dab.
Don't hold your breath.
Okay.
But it appears that at least the Native American one was returned, and probably this one as well, because there's no Family History Center in either of these, which this African American one has already been built. So we see the victory laps. We see all of the positive PR. And then we never get to see the retraction. That really begs the question, Glenn. The church supposedly in 2021, they donated $100 million of humanitarian donations, not including the fast offering. And in 2022, they donated $200 million, not including the fast offering. And that's all self-church reported. Well, how many of those donations have been returned as well? And since the church engages in no external auditing, how can we trust these church donations either to museums or humanitarian as well? I mean,
why are you trusting the church at all? Why are you asking, how can I trust the church? I don't understand. Are you still trying to trust the church, Dives?
Well, I want to take the church at its words for what it's doing for its donations, but it's hard to do that when we see donations that are being returned. As in both of these situations, when there's no external auditing that's associated with these, it's hard to confirm all of these church donations. How many others if you look back for the last 25 years, all of the church reports, how many of those humanitarian donations have been returned or actually did not take place to begin with? Everyone says, well, the church is donating hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, I mean, it's just hard to take the church at its word in this particular case. It also reminds me real quick, Glenn, I belong to kind of an amusing Facebook page. It's imagined that all of Star Trek were Mormons. And so it's
Is
called
John Hamer part of that page?
I don't think so. It was run by Rebecca Biblioteca, but the idea behind it is, imagine that everyone in the Star Trek universe is a Mormon. And so I posted this meme on there. I post once or twice a week. Hey, wait, they gave the $2 million back to the church. It's kind of amusing to me, this entire thing. Any last thoughts on this entire Native American Museum returning the $2 million?
The church is a business. It's a corporation, and it acts like a corporation, and it's very transactional. So it doesn't surprise me to see these kinds of things. It's in the business of selling salvation and selling hope, creating community, very insular community, very us versus them kind of community. And I think I just from my own experience as a missionary in Japan, it confused me why these Japanese people didn't want, the ones that were rejecting us, that were saying, no, thank you. Our house is Buddhist. We don't need to hear your Christian message. It always confused me why they didn't want to hear the truth. I just didn't know. And it took a long time for me to go, oh, wait, there's more going on than what I've been taught up to this point. And so, the way I see things now, Dives, is every single person is at a stage of growth and progression, whatever you're growing towards and whatever you're progressing towards. I think Mormons have a hard time getting out of the insular, myopic Mormon way of seeing the world and going, why wouldn't this museum want what we have to offer? I mean, $2 million, this is a great thing. We're going in. And they don't understand the strings attached to it. They don't value it, and they kind of discount it. And so,
Yeah, well, we definitely value your opinion here, Glenn. And speaking of
thank
the
you.
corporate nature of the church, you talked about that corporate part of the church. You know, the church has vast resources in the Ensign Peak Associates, at least approximately 150 to 190 billion dollars in Ensign Peak, which is they have a number of domestic stocks that they buy, and also private equities and real estate, and also foreign investment stocks, bonds, the whole nine yards. You name it, the church is invested in it. And this is the article that came out of the Salt Lake Tribune this week, which really gave me a bit of pause, especially considering the crisis which has happened over in Israel, in the Gaza Strip. The title of this article here, Glenn, kind of gave me some pause. It said the LDS Church's investment arm, Ensign Peak Associates, bought more than 200,000 shares in the private equity fund that Hamas used to fund its operations, though there's no indication that the church knew about the Hamas ties at that time. And it just really, again, that's the corporate nature of the church, that the church bought some shares in a fund that was based out of Turkey. Well, it turned out that fund was also used for funding Hamas, even though there's no evidence that the church knew about the connection. The church is somewhat responsible for funding of Hamas. And especially considering Hamas's egregious actions here in the last 2 months with the murder of 1,600 people last October, I just couldn't believe what I'm seeing here with the corporate nature of the church. Buying Hamas shares, that's crazy. The supernatural claims of the church, for me, are very hard to examine. You know, I wasn't there when Joseph Smith said that he had a theophany. Because Russell M. Nelson, he never prophesies, I can't judge the prophecy because he never gives any. I can't see the senior leaders of the church. I can't follow them in the hospitals and see if their healing did anything. They don't translate any books of scripture, so we can't compare those anyway. This is important for me, at least, and I follow Ensign Peak very carefully. We can follow Ensign Peak and what it does, and for me, it is a great way to be able to validate church truth claims. Because if this is God's investment fund, if this is Jesus's slush fund, then what I would expect to see from that is, number one, that it's outperforming the S&P 500, which it frequently does not do. And I would expect them to, not being investing in funds that turn out to be used for terrorists, right? I mean, so I assume that, at once a month or once a quarter, that the Ensign Peak guys, they give a briefing to President Nelson and the others, and they say, hey, this is what we're investing in, and that he prays about it, gets an answer from God. This is what I've been told, at least, that he gets an answer from God, and then, yes, God's swearing off on the investment fund. Well, why? The whole thing doesn't make any sense.
I guess because I don't view Ensign Peak in that similar way, that it's not that surprising to me. It was a couple of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, that his twin brother Lars reached out to me and said, hey, I'd like to kind of blow the whistle on this thing. And it's something I'm kind of proud of, Infants on Thrones, that he would ask me to be the one to let's talk about what's been going on here with the whistleblowing thing. So I'm somewhat familiar with that, but again, it was a while ago that I've talked with Lars. But I don't really see this as anything other than the different business arms underneath the. And I forget what the official title is of the president of the church, was like corporate I don't even remember what the words are. I don't know, but all of these small businesses that are under the arm of the church, that they're just trying to do what businesses do in investing. And I don't think they're doing a ton of, I don't know if they're doing, I don't know that world of an investment and what kind of due diligence you do. We talked earlier and you were telling me about Warren Buffett and these other guys that they travel around the world and they really investigate and do their due diligence into what they're investing in. And I don't know how Ensign Peak does it, and I don't know how Hamas sets up their things. And I'm excited to see if 2 prophets from the church go over there and just kind of hang out with all this conflict, because I heard they're supposed to be killed and be dead for 3 days in the streets or something like that before the second coming. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, in the book of Revelations, that's going to be a
Yeah.
very difficult prophecy to fulfill, considering the fact that President Nelson has not left the state of Utah during the entire last year, except for one
Yeah.
time to dedicate the Washington, D.C. temple. So, Glenn, I think you can rest easy knowing that he is not going anywhere near Jerusalem. Therefore, the last days are not coming. But I
Okay.
just
So I've
wanted to
got some time, you're
You
telling me?
definitely have
Okay.
plenty of time considering
All
that
right.
he does not travel anywhere. I did have a question about Lars Nielsen. He gave his letter to an IRS director. He made that YouTube video, I believe, back in 2019. Are you saying that he did an episode on Infants of Thrones before he
Yeah,
made the YouTube video?
I think so. I mean, I don't know when he made the YouTube video, but the way that I remember it, he approached me and said, "Hey, I want to talk about this," and that was the first time. He was doing something a year or two ago where I think he was working with, maybe it was people at Netflix or something like that. They were going to make a documentary, and he was asking if he could get a video copy of that interview. I don't know. So I can find that episode and let you know what it is if you're interested in it.
I am definitely going to watch that episode on Infants of Thrones without question.
Okay.
I am very interested in Ensign Peak and how it operates, of what it does. The fact that we've seen from times past that it's invested in sin stocks and gambling and in Starbucks, and now perhaps unwittingly investing in terrorist operations. See, this is my tithing money that's in Ensign Peak. I want to follow what
You still
what
pay
is-
tithing, Dives?
Well, my tithing money is in Ensign Peak, and I imagine that some of yours is too. So that makes me very interested in what they're doing in Ensign Peak. I'm fascinated by the church finances, and especially with the Widow's Mite report. That's the first thing I'm going to do when we're done is I'm going to look up that Infants and Thrones, Lars Nielsen, and listen to it, because I've watched the letter to an IRS director on his YouTube, which I thought before this time was the only time that he gave a public statement on it. I guess it shows my ignorance.
It's episode 603. It was published December 16th, 2019. And then I did a follow-up with him that's episode 610. So 603 and 610 are kind of part one and part two. 610 is a little bit more about Lars and his background. But there's two episodes that kind of cover this.
Can't wait. Looking forward to it for sure. Now, Glenn, I don't know how much you've been following Tim Ballard and the absolute train wreck tragedy that was associated with it. So Tim Ballard, he ran the Operation Underground Railroad there for a few years, which supposedly would rescue children who were being sexually trafficked in far-flung locations. And it turns out also that he had the movie that was Sound of Freedom that came out last summer that was supposedly loosely based on his life. Well, he's now been basically disgraced. He's been sued. He's been accused of being a grifter. The crazy thing about it is when he would go on these psychic trips to these developing countries and these far-flung locations, the way that he supposedly found the children who were being sex trafficked was that he would rely on a psychic named Janet Russon. But she has just appeared on a podcast. Speaking of podcasts, Glenn, she's just appeared on a podcast. It's called The Last Dispensation, which is a really French podcast out there. A psychic who aided Tim Ballard said that she never spoke to the Book of Mormon prophet Nephi. And when she worked with Operation Underground Railroad, she's finally broken her silence. She's been at the center of this big controversy. This has been an incredible mess here with the Tim Ballard.
I haven't been following. Like I unplugged from this stuff. You know, you mentioned at the beginning of this that I was the first person that you reached out to co-host. I don't follow the news, and especially like this Mormon LDS kind of stuff. So a friend of mine brought the Tim Ballard stuff to my attention about a month ago, and I like psychics for different reasons, not because I expect them to give me something that I can rely on. I just like having conversations with them that are out of this world. But I don't know anything about Janet Russo. Is it Janet Russo? Is that her name? I don't know why it would be important for her to talk to Nephi or not talk to Nephi when she's identifying where these kids are. I don't really know much about, but I'm curious.
I don't know how psychics work, that's for sure. But the alleged
they make things up, like you and me. That's how they do it. And they're not, and they claim something other than that. But again,
I would
like you and me,
so.
Sometimes, just in different ways.
Yeah, for sure. Now, from the leaked documents that we have, the 10,000 pages of leaked documents, she supposedly told Tim Ballard that she was communicating with the prophet Nephi, who was telling her where these children were to be rescued. And Tim Ballard,
was Nephi using the Liahona? Because if he was, and they weren't being very faithful, that could be why things were messed up.
I can't confirm that. Like you said, psychics, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one. I mean, that's very plausible because I do understand from the Book of Mormon reading that you have to use the Liahona in a prescribed manner. Otherwise, it does not work. So that would make a lot of sense. Not sure about it. But Tim Ballard, he did strike back this week. He's been sued as being a grifter. Took hundreds of thousands of dollars of donations from people and allegedly didn't rescue a single soul. And, he's also been accused of sexual assault by a number of women. There's a couple of criminal investigations against him. And now Operation Underground Railroad countersues a woman who has accused Tim Ballard of sexual assault. So the attorneys here say that the woman, who's a former employee and an assistant to Tim Ballard, he's now countersued. So the lawsuits are getting thick in the middle of this. This is a big story because, I don't know, Tim Ballard is, he was a sound of freedom. He was a hero both within the Mormon community and without the Mormon community. Now he's been excommunicated from the church. He's been sued a number of times. He's lost all of his position. He's lost his entire persona. Allegedly, his marriage is also having a challenge. And now he's countersuing. He's striking back. It's a big, giant mess. And this is the kind of thing that I find interesting. I like to watch this incredible dumpster fire. I do hope that justice is served in this case, especially for these women who seem to have credibly accused him of sexual assault. But I like watching dumpster fires, Glenn.
What would justice be in this case for you? What would you like to see happen?
Oh, I could not possibly prejudge. That's one thing that I cannot do. I don't have the evidence in this. I haven't seen the court. I mean, we have seen the court filings, Glenn. We've seen the pages and pages of accusations that have been released, also from the amended complaints. But we really need to solve these cases from a jury of our peers. I mean, we have a criminal justice system, and I couldn't possibly speculate as to what is going to happen as far as justice is concerned. It appears to me that Tim Ballard took hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of people from a lot of wealthy, mostly Mormons, some non-Mormons, but a lot of Mormons, and that he didn't rescue anyone. If that's the case, then he needs to face the music. And also the sexual harassment, sexual assault complaints, if those are justified, and it appears from everything that I've seen, it appears that they are, then he also needs to face the music on that. So Tim Ballard's career, hopefully as a grifter, I hope that it's going to be over. And I hope that, like I said, justice is served. I don't know what that means. I couldn't speculate, but I hope that justice is served.
I like that word grifter. What exactly is a grifter? A grifter is like a con man? Because I have this picture of like a hobo that's riding a train when you say the word grifter.
Tim Ballard for me is kind of like a modern archetype of Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith had the stone in the hat. He went on multiple treasure digs. He told people, he made up stories using the occult, just like Tim Ballard, channeling the prophet Nephi, channeling psychics, dabbling in the occult to allegedly find either, for Joseph Smith, buried treasure and golden artifacts. And Tim Ballard, it's rescuing children. I see them as very similar to each other. And also think about Tim Ballard. He's been incredibly accused by multiple women of sexual grooming, of sexual assault. Joseph Smith, it's in the same vein. This is just a modern reincarnation of Joseph Smith. A couple of our other articles here to get you through here, and this was also went very, very viral here. The church and the sexual assault has been, very, very sad stories throughout the year. In fact, next week we're going to be releasing our top 10 here, Glenn. Top 10 Mormon stories of the year. We're going to be doing that with the Mormonish podcasting hosts. But this is, the church has had a very, very bad year in sexual assault, just like our last article brought out.
What would a good year in sexual assault be, Dives? I don't think there's any good year of this. I don't think you could have. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. A good year in sexual
assault. This is what I do, Dives. Maybe you should have mentioned that Infants on Thrones, the tagline is the philosophies of men mingled with humor. Yeah. Because I can't help but joke around about stuff. So I apologize if I'm being too flippant on these things.
It's pretty hard to make a rape joke. I'm just putting that out there, Glenn. But if anyone can do it, Infants on Thrones can. No. I don't know if I'm quite there yet because sexual assault, that's kind of a touchy subject. But if you're asking me what would a good year look like for sexual assault? I'm not. Let's move on. That's only Infants on Thrones could make that joke. But what I'm saying is, what could a good year look like for sexual assault in the church? Of course, a good year would be, implementing mandatory background checks for every single person who's going to be working with children, showing accountability for past injustices. The church has been sued by class action of the Boy Scouts, and they only coughed up $250 million to settle that class action, which was rejected by the judge. So the church lowballed all of those thousands of scouts. The church could implement implement best training practices for bishops. Right now, all they have to do is like a 30-minute online module once a year. They could do real training by credentialed persons and have continuing education for the people who are working with children. They could have in every single stake, they could have a domestic violence or a sexual assault prevention coordinator. The church could have a much better year than what it has now. They could take President Nelson could take responsibility. He could meet with survivors. The church could, value the victims over its own bank account. The church can have a much better year than it has had. I mean, you're asking me, what can the church do? A lot.
That's a really good answer. That's a really good answer.
The church can do a ton more than what it's doing. And what we're seeing instead is, this is Jasmine over at Scripture Plus. And Jasmine, I assume that she is also paid by the church because Scripture Plus is a part of Scripture Central, which receives approximately $20 million a year from the church to do apologetics or church defending the church. She's put out this video here just this in the last couple of days here, Glenn, which I want to get your reaction to. Even if you don't follow Mormon news maybe as carefully as I do, hopefully you will see what she's saying here and have a reaction. So this is from Scripture Plus, which has tens of thousands of followers. She says, a common question I hear when talking about preventing sexual assault is, why doesn't the church do background checks? Surely we want to be thorough in vetting the people that will work with your youth and children. Well, let's hear what Jasmine has to say.
A common question I hear when talking about preventing SA is, why doesn't the church do background checks? Surely we want to be thorough in vetting the people that will work with our youth and children. Well, for those who feel strongly about background checks, you may be encouraged to hear that the church is apparently beginning to implement background checks for children and youth calling in the UK. I don't know if they're planning to implement this more widely in the future. But an important thing to understand is that mandatory background checks can be counterproductive. Let me explain what I mean by this. Background checks do not screen for people who have committed SA. They don't. They only screen for people who have been formally charged and or convicted of SA, and that's a really high bar to pass. Most perpetrators, tragically, have not been apprehended by the law and so would clear a background check. This can instill a false sense of security, and we can put our guard down around unsafe people. For example, the case in Bisbee, Arizona, where a man committed horrific SA against his children. At the time of the incidents, he was not convicted of any crime, and so he could have cleared a background check. And in fact, he did clear a background check because he worked for the government. And so while a background check can screen for some major things, there are some pretty severe limitations that sometimes can outweigh the benefits. So this is just one more thing we have to consider when grappling with this really complicated issue.
All right, Glenn, background checks can give you a false sense of security.
I don't see any problem with anything that she said. What I think that she said was people are calling for background checks, and you might be glad to hear that they're starting to implement that. But background checks aren't going to solve the problem completely. If you think that having background checks is really going to keep the kids safe from sexual predators, there are more things that need to happen. It's not just background checks, because if you just do a background check and you think, okay, that did it, then you've got a false sense of security, and people who haven't been convicted that would clear a background check could still have access to children. And so there's more steps that would need to be taken. That's what I take away from that video and what she was saying. So I don't find anything particularly upsetting or controversial about what she said.
She seems to be arguing that background checks, because they are not a silver bullet, as you mentioned, there is no one-size-fits-all panacea in this particular case. It's incredibly complex. It needs to have partnerships from the government, from churches, from individuals. It needs to be an all-hands-on-deck approach to reducing this horrific sexual assault, which seems to be blighting in the church and without the church. Yeah, so it seems to me that she's saying, well, because background checks are not a silver bullet, because they will not catch everyone, and she cites a case where background checks would not have caught everyone, that background checks don't need to be done. And I find that to be a very harmful
Did she say that they don't need to be done? I may have missed that part. I didn't get that from what she was saying.
I would say that it was implied, because Scripture Plus is always out there to defend the church's position. And the church's position is that they do not engage in background checks for people who are working with children unless that particular state or that particular country requires them to do it. So that's why she's saying, I get questions as to why the church doesn't do background checks. She says, well, it's because background checks don't catch everyone. But the problem I have with that is that background checks will catch some. It's not going to catch all. It's going to catch some. So if you talk to the children, if you talk to the women who have been abused, who their perpetrators would have been caught by those background checks, look them in the eye and tell them that background checks give a false sense of security. So that's the pushback or the issue that I have with her video. And a lot of people have said that that's, I don't know, that's a very harmful mindset, because the best practices in the industry, everyone, all other churches, nonprofits, a lot of states, a lot of countries require people to have background checks. But she seems to be saying, well, it's not that big of a deal. I think it is a really big deal.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think the thing that's a big deal, protection to prevent it from happening, but also you're not going to be able to prevent all of them from happening. So what do you do with those, where it has happened? About 3 years ago, I went back to school to get a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling to become a therapist. And I've been working as a life coach for the last 4 years, working with people, with clients that have issues, some who have been abused in the church. And I read a book that really made a big change on how I view this situation. And it's called The Body Keeps the Score. It's about how abuse stays with you and impacts you for your entire life, how it changes the way that you're able to trust people, the way that you process information. So yeah, the body keeps the score. I think that should be required reading for everybody, because you never know when you're interacting with somebody, whoever it is. You don't know if they were abused when they were a kid. A lot of times they don't even know if they were abused when they were a kid. They might have these ramifications of abuse and neglect, and there's a lot of that happens in the church, even outside of the sexual abuse that you're talking about. But we're all carrying around this stuff, man. Every single person is carrying around trauma that impacts the way that you view the world and how comfortable you feel in your own skin and how comfortable you feel with others. And so, background checks to me is it's important, and it's a small piece, but I'm glad that she said, it could give you a false sense of security. If you think that background checks is the only thing, no, educate yourself. Everybody should educate themselves on this, because like you said, it's a bigger epidemic than the Mormon Church, much, much bigger epidemic than the Mormon Church.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate your thoughts on that. Now, you can find the Mormon News Roundup. You can find us on Apple Podcasts along with Infants on Thrones. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're also on YouTube, and we're also on Instagram. We're on TikTok. If you come on over to our social media, let us know what you think about Jasmine's viral video. Is she right? Is Glen right? What should the church do with regards to minimizing the abuse that comes from child sexual assault? It's kind of big news too here. The Pope Francis has formally approved Catholic bishops to bless same-sex unions, saying people seeking God's love shouldn't be subject to an exhaustive moral analysis. And we talked about this in the pre-show, that it's just amazing how many religions, even Christian religions out there, are starting to approve with same-sex unions, and it's leaving the LDS Church far behind, shall we say, the social wars.
I recommend that everybody leave the Mormon Church far behind, especially, those who are in same-sex relationships. I don't know. I say that kind of tongue in cheek, because I know that the Mormon Church is very valuable for people that it's valuable for. So I wouldn't want to take that away from you. I just say be careful. But I say be careful with everything, really. And any organization that you're involved with, or any ideology that you're dogmatically clutching to. Be careful with that and become more aware.
But since Infants on Thrones is famous for your jokes, I'm trying to keep it light here, because the Babylon Bee, which is one of my favorite satirist websites here, it says that the Pope, right after Pope Francis released that kind of bombshell, because the church had for many years said that they're not going to do same-sex marriage. Well, Pope Francis, he's now excommunicated the Apostle Paul over his outdated views on women and marriage. So that's kind of a lighter take on it. But the most famous Mormon, actually, in my opinion here, Glenn, is probably Mr. Charlie Bird. He's the former Cosmo the Cougar. And he just released this last week here. This is, in my opinion, probably the most famous gay member of the church. He just released in the last week that he's gotten married to Ryan, his fiance. We're seeing again is the church being left far behind in the social wars. And if you look at, for instance, David A. Bednar in the National Press Club briefing last year, which is where he was asked about gay marriage, he gave absolutely no he didn't give the tiniest bit of wiggle room. He says that marriage is between a man and a woman. He didn't say that we're praying about it. He didn't say that we're seeking a revelation on it. He said that, he quoted the family proclamation, and there's no wiggle room. And considering the fact that he is most likely going to be the president of the church probably in about 5 years time frame from now, and then probably for the next 20 years after that, you're not going to see the church change positions on this, in my opinion, for the next 25 years. Any last thoughts on Pope Francis and the LGBTQ issues?
I told you earlier that I kind of view everything as growth and progression, and we're in different stages. And I think, I'm old enough that I have seen this change in my own life, where things have become much more open and accepting, and there's pockets of resistance to that change and that growth. And the Mormon Church is definitely one. It's one where they've been very clear they're doubling down on what's right and what's wrong. I hope it changes. I'd be shocked if in 30 or 40 years it hasn't changed. I think it'll soften. I think it'll change, because the fluidity of love from person to person is part of the growth that I think we're moving towards, just culturally as a body of humanity. I think we're becoming more and more accepting of things, even though there are these pockets of resistance to change. So I've got an optimistic view of the future on that, and really happy that I've distanced myself from the Mormon Church and from those teachings that used to keep me feeling like there was something wrong. Like I've got 2 daughters that are gender fluid, and before they were born, I remember talking with their mom, my ex-wife, what are we going to do if they have friends when they go to school who are gay, or if they're going to go to a slumber party and they've got 2 moms, or if they got 2 dads? Like, we're putting these kids into this evil world. And I really believed that. I really felt that. And again, it took a while for me to go, wait, why is that evil again? What's wrong about it? Yeah, I don't think it is. So I hope everybody else gets on that same page of compassionate understanding and acceptance. That's if I can help people become more compassionate and accepting and understanding, then that's what I want to do, and have fun doing it with some humor.
Well, that's definitely the tagline of the Infants on Thrones: the philosophies of men mingled with humor. So that's definitely a good approach for sure.
Yeah.
A couple of other big articles that came out from this week as well. This is another. There's always seems to be so many Mormon scandals, Glenn, and I like to keep up on them myself. So that's what you get with the Mormon News Roundup. And this is LDS billionaire Trevor Milton. He's one of the wealthiest Mormons, or I guess he was, on the planet. He has been sentenced to 4 years today for defrauding investors of $500 million. He was really one of the wealthiest Mormons around.
Ed, what more can you tell us?
Yeah, so Nikola founder Trevor Milton has been sentenced to 4 years in prison. The 4 years is significantly lower than the 11-year term that the government was pushing for and that probation officials had recommended, based on the 1 count of securities fraud and 2 counts of wire fraud, of which he was found guilty in October 2022. But it is still a significant sentence, 4 years. As you said, Trevor Milton was found guilty of misleading investors over the progress that his company had made in its early stages, the capabilities of its technology. This is a trial that we at Bloomberg have been following very closely for a number of years. We kind of first broke the news in June 2020 that Milton, according to our sources, had made misstatements about the capabilities of Nikola's early technology. But 4 years is what it is what the sentence is. Just a quick point of interest: U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, whose office led this trial, is the same office that got a guilty conviction on Sam Bankman-Fried, and they've kind of promised to crack down on this white-collar financial crime area. This is their latest successful victory.
Well, that's where I was just going to go, in fact, Ed, because this is a signal potentially for how Sam Bankman-Fried might be sentenced. Does it, though, depend on the judge? I'm sure Damian Williams doesn't particularly see this as a win, 4 years, particularly when you think about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos getting 11 years.
Yeah, at the core of this case was whether or not retail investors in particular had been moved to take action by Trevor Milton's statements, particularly on social media. And in debate around his sentencing, the reason that the government stated it was important to have strict sentencing was to avoid any temptation by future actors to behave in the same way, and such that the everyday investor could receive harm. That was kind of the motivation from the government side of this case. They wanted to see strong action to deter any similar behavior in the future.
His company, Nikola, think about Nikola Tesla. They made electric semi-trucks. Okay, but it turned out that the only prototype that they ever actually made, it was a complete joke. It couldn't drive. They towed it up to the top of like Parley's Canyon in Utah, and it only coasted down for the promotional video. He bilked all these people out of hundreds of millions of dollars. He's a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. To my knowledge, hasn't been excommunicated yet. It just seems like we see a lot of Mormons here, Glenn, that I don't know. There's something in the water about it that the defrauding people just come naturally. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a lot bigger than Mormons. I don't think that there's anything particularly Mormon about it. But what made me laugh in that news story was when they were talking about the sentencing and was it enough, and is it enough to deter future criminals from doing anything? Like I don't think that this guy really was looking at what he was going to do and go, well, the punishment system is pretty lenient right now, so I think it's a good opportunity for me to go and grift. Is that what he was doing? In my studies for clinical mental health counseling, I came across William Glasser, who's the founder of reality therapy, reality theory, choice theory. And one particular idea that he had really stuck out to me. And it was this idea of external control psychology, where you're trying to control other people. You're trying to control the outside world. And he came up with the 7 deadly habits of external control psychology. And I'm not sure I remember all 7 of them off the top of my head, but it was things like complaining and bribing and punishing. Punishing is the one that I really wanted to bring up here, because you're using a punishment as a way to try to control behavior. And I know there's another story that you've got coming up here where there are some parents that were trying to control their kids through punishment. And when you're trying to control other people using these really toxic things, William Glasser suggests caring habits of like listening and empathy as an antidote to the controlling habits. And I'm sorry I don't have that more off the top of my head that I can talk about it in more detail. But I see news stories like this, and stuff like this happens. It's going to keep happening. There's going to be people out there who are trying to cheat other people, especially when there's so much that you can make a lot of money from cheating people. And if you don't have any problem with cheating people and exploiting people, and it's all about like how much money you can make and all of the status and fame and whatever you get, clout, power from exploiting other people, if that's in your nature, then you're going to do it, whether you're Mormon or not. And I do think that the system of Mormonism lead more people to think it's okay to exploit those that aren't worthy or don't deserve it, or things like that, where there's this kind of us versus them, the worthy versus the unworthy. It's kind of easy for Mormons to think that. But again, I don't think that's an exclusively Mormon thing. I think you see that everywhere, and it's a problem.
Yeah, fair enough. You definitely see it everywhere. It's just amazing to me that this is the second big time fraud case this year that has reached $500 million. There was another case back in February where this was in Las Vegas, where Mormons were targeted an alleged $500 million Ponzi scheme. So we've had, and that was also run by a Mormon. So we've had two this year, $500 million Mormon-led fraud schemes.
Well, let's say 3, because you've already mentioned Ensign Peak, and we could say 4 because you talked about tithing.
If you're adding on, we'll also add 5, the Mormon News Roundup Patreon. That's also.
Oh, but that's not. Are you exploiting people? You're giving them. You're doing a valuable exchange.
Oh,
here,
okay.
I think so, Dives.
Yeah, it's very, very far different than those other folks. I guess this was a bad time to bring up the Patreon for sure. But It just seems to be something in the water. There's a reason that Utah is the MLM capital of the world. There's a reason that so much fraud is perpetrated, and it seems to be outsized from, the latest analysis here, Glenn, is that there's approximately 800,000 to a million temple recommend holding endowed members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but they are engaging in a fraud level which seems to be outsized from their normal population. And that to me is concerning. Why are we seeing these levels of grifting from Tim Ballard, from this case, from the other Las Vegas case? We continue to see it time and time again. And reporters like Lynn Packard and others keep shining a light on this. And I don't know. It's very concerning to me.
With that concern, like if you really are seeing that there's this disproportionate ratio of Mormons that are more easily exploitable, what do you do with that? Like if that's what you've seen and that's what you're feeling and you're concerned about it, like what do you do with that?
That's a very, very interesting question. The only thing that I can do is try to shine a light on these things that I see. I mean, I have a very small podcast. It's very, very small and compared to Infants on Thrones or any others. I try to shine a light on it and point out some of the harmful practices. I don't really have a call to action. I don't have a silver bullet. The only thing I could say is that you need to be very careful because, in Mormonism, it teaches you to trust other people based on their calling or based on their position or based on, I don't know, their relationship or how holy they are or how many prayers they give a night. And we need to be, very careful for all of us to examine any claims, supernatural claims or financial claims that other people present to us, especially knowing that Mormons can be targeted because of their implicit trust in other people. Mormons are a very trusting people. And so we just need to watch out for it. I mean, I know that seems very pithy and pretty small, and this is a small podcast, but that's the only answer that I have.
Well, I'm glad it's just a small podcast and not a pithy podcast. You mentioned the word trust, I think 3 times. And that's key, right? Because when things like this are happening, it makes it hard to trust. And when you lose trust, what are you losing when it's hard to trust? There's the saying that trust isn't given, it's earned, or, like something like that, which I think is baloney. Again, another one of these fictional things that you hear and you just accept and you're like, okay, yeah, like trust is something that you give, whether somebody has earned it or not. Somebody could do whatever, like, I've done all the things. Why don't you trust me yet? I'm still not sure. Trust is one of these things, going back to that book I mentioned earlier, The Body Keeps the Score. If you don't feel comfortable, you're not going to trust. And so maybe the overall message here is that the Mormon church makes people feel so comfortable that they're comfortable trusting without doing a lot of due diligence, or maybe they don't even know what to look for red flags. I don't necessarily want to live in a world where everybody is so afraid of everybody else that they just don't give their trust. I think trying to find that medium ground where you can healthily trust the people that you're interacting with, that trust the people in your life, even trusting yourself. I mean, trust is a huge issue there. So yeah, you got people that are defrauding people out of millions of dollars and getting fooled. That happens all the time. How do you protect yourself to make sure that doesn't happen to you? That's kind of what I was asking, like, what do you do with something like this? How do you take when you hear something like this in the news and go, how am I going to improve my life based on what's going on here and this concern that I have?
Personally, I am trying to be very careful with my investments and who it is that I trust. And just because somebody has a high ecclesiastical office or pretends to be a person who is incredibly spiritual, that does not necessarily mean for me that I'm going to give them an implicit trust into doing things which could harm others. And that also runs right into our next article here, which is YouTube mom, Ruby Frankie. So Ruby Frankie, she was a big time Mormon influencer who, had hundreds of thousands of followers. You look on her social media pages and she's a very shiny, happy person. It seems like everything is great on the outside. But then what happens is she was arrested for 6 counts of child abuse. And she has now just pled guilty. This is a big time Mormon influencer who has hundreds of thousands of followers here, Glenn, maybe even millions across all of our social media platforms. And she's been brought, you asked me about justice. Well, we've seen her be brought to justice for her incredibly harmful parenting techniques where she wouldn't feed her children. She would duct tape them. They were emaciated. And now she's been brought to justice and she's pled guilty here, Glenn.
Ms. Frankie is now here. Mr. Windward, we are scheduled for a waiver hearing. Is there going to be a waiver today?
There will, plus a plea agreement, Your Honor.
All right. Ms. Frankie, did you sign this agreement?
Yes,
And you did that today? When did you sign it?
May 18th.
Okay. You've read it carefully?
Every word.
Ms. Frankie, how do you plead to count 1, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 3, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 5, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
And to count 6, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
With my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children, guilty.
I guess the theme of this particular episode is trust, because even the members of her own family saw that she was had a harmful mentality. She, was very abusive to her children. She was very, she had put on the appearances of being a great Mormon. And then when you peel back the onion, she was a reprehensible mother. And it's not just about, like we saw with Tim Ballard with the grifting, or with Trevor Milton with the bilking people out of millions of dollars. It's about, the trust that other members of the church give to one another. Her own family members said that they saw a pattern of abuse for years with her, but never reported it because, and that's the question, why didn't anyone report this? Even some of her own family members knew of the abuse, and they could have stopped it before it got out of hand, but nobody ever did. Remember, we have the ministering program in the church where people are visiting each other every single month, checking up on people. I mean, they had a YouTube account here that had a lot of red flags, but no one seemed to do anything until it was too late.
How many stories like this are out there? I got very emotional watching that. There's no doubt in my mind that she herself is that she was abused in some ways, that the way that she's acting out towards her children is a kind of learned behavior, not just from the culture of Mormonism, but whatever was back in her past. It wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, I would expect to find something like that. When I was 5 years old, I'm the oldest of 3, and my dad thought that I was too rambunctious or rowdy or irreverent, or whatever he thought that I was, and that I needed to be taught a lesson in obedience. And so I live in Arizona. He took me out in the middle of the desert, 5 years old, put a blindfold on me, put me in the middle of a cactus patch, and said, no, in order for you to get out of this cactus patch unscathed, you're going to need to listen very closely to what I tell you to do and do precisely what I say. And this is the object lesson, where I'm like God and you're living in mortality and all these challenges of life. And if you listen to the Heavenly Father, you'll get through unscathed. And so he tried to teach me this object lesson, and I ended up walking into a cactus that he didn't see, and it was just a horrible a horrible experience. But even when I talk to my dad today, who my dad is still active, devout member of the church, he thinks that what he did was awesome. He's like, yeah, the execution might have had some snags, but it was a really good idea, really good object lesson. And it's one of the reasons why that William Glasser external control psychology spoke so much to me, because here he's trying to get me to be different than I am by punishing me. And I know that this YouTube mom was doing a lot of really horrific things to her kids in the same way, and I'm sure it was done to her, and it's done to various degrees by so many people in and out of the church. So again, if there's a common theme to me from what we've been talking about today, trust is definitely a part of it, but trauma is probably bigger. And the impacts of trauma, you get these sensational stories that come out in the news where you can see this trauma, this trauma, this trauma, this trauma, this trauma. All right, let's push pause and look inside. What's inside of you that has been caused by trauma, and what kind of trauma are you pushing out into the world without even knowing it, without even being aware of it? What kind of trauma are you doing? So that's what I see with this woman in this story, is that it just got to a certain place. Why isn't anybody whistleblowing her on her trauma when they see the pattern of behavior? Because this is the soup. This is what we swim in. This is the culture that we live in. There's just so much of this. It made me really emotional, guys.
Maybe I should have prefaced that with a trigger warning in advance. I know a lot of people do that because, unfortunately, we do cover a lot of the most scandalous and the most controversial articles. And unfortunately, there is a lot of abuse that members of the church perpetrate on one another, and also are the recipients of it, whether they're being defrauded or whether the children are being abused sexually, or whether mothers are not doing what they're supposed to do. I mean, there is a lot of trauma, and that's one unfortunate reality.
I was going to say that comes with reality.
Yeah, I mean, it comes with reality. It also comes with religion as well. Ruby founded the Connections Academy, which is basically a Mormon influenced cult. Religion can teach you to do a lot of harmful things in the name of God. And that's really where we got the Lori Vallow. That's where we get the Ruby Frankies. And that's where we get some of the most harmful abuse, like Tim Ballard, who was allegedly channeling psychics. And religion can lead to a lot of harmful mentality. And I guess we're just seeing that. And, I don't know. I do this podcast every week. So maybe it's the fact, I think you're pointing out to me, Glenn, the fact that I've kind of been numbed to some of the trauma that is associated with LDS news and on the news and the headlines. And since you don't follow this space as carefully as I do, maybe it's a little bit more raw to you. And maybe that's an indictment of me that I need to look a little bit better within myself to have a little bit more empathy for these particular cases.
People who have followed Infants on Thrones from the beginning, it definitely shifted its tone. When we started out, there were 6 of us, and now it's only me. But there were 6 of us, and we were the rowdy guys that would sit on the back row of church and make fun of stuff. And there was a lot of flippancy in it. And I got to a certain point where I started recognizing these patterns that I kept seeing over and over and over again that had to do with the way that people think and the way that they process information. And I was introduced to this cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and these cognitive distortions that we have. And I started recognizing the relationship between the way that I was raised, the things that I was taught as a Mormon, contributing to a black and white way of seeing the world, or that I happened to make mountains out of molehills and catastrophize and doing all these different things. I wasn't reasoning very well. I wasn't taking everything into consideration. I'd hyper focus on one area and ignore other things that if I was focusing on these other things, it would create more of a balance. And that's what really made a shift in me. And I think in the tone of the podcast, where I got interested in mental health. I got interested in psychology and really wanting to work with people individually to help where they can. But I also think a big part of that was just for me to do my own healing of things that I hadn't even been aware of. And things that I'm still discovering about my past and my history, and why I think the way that I do and feel the way that I do, and some of this unconscious programming that I'm carrying around with me. That in the early days of Infants on Thrones, I wasn't really interested in that. I wasn't focused on any of that stuff. It was just like, the Mormon church says that they're true, but look, here's evidence that they're not. Let's make fun of that. People believe this, but look how stupid it is. And now I'm much more interested in why is it that belief is there in the first place? It means something. There's something that's going on there. Yeah, I want to explore that more and really create a sense of peace and tranquility within myself and with others as much as I possibly can, because there's so much not peace and tranquility in the world. I don't want to contribute to that. I'd rather contribute to peace and tranquility. So what can I do? That's it. And I'm not trying to call you out on anything types at all. What you're doing is perfect, and what you're doing is serving a lot of people and serving yourself, and it's great. So,
well, I guess I gravitate most to the Infants on Thrones episodes where you do the smackdowns and it's a little bit more irreverent humor. I guess that's just my personal cup of tea.
Sure.
And maybe you're just a little bit more of a serious person than I am, which
I'm in my 50s now, man.
Well, I can definitely respect that, but we have to end on a little bit of a light note. I got 2 last articles, and they are on the lighter side to kind of remind you of what the Infants on Thrones used to be like once upon a time. They dedicated in St. George 2 temples, and this article here from Cat Country, they said, where can we put the 3rd temple in St. George? And by the way, I did grow up in St. George. I grew up in Oklahoma, as I mentioned earlier, and I also grew up in St. George. How do you like that? So I need you to give me a 1 to 10. How do you like that particular temple location there? That 1 to 10, is that a good spot for it, or what do you think?
I wish that the lettering wasn't there, because I'd like to see what the parking situation is like, maybe on the other side of the temple there. I think you might have to have like the spelunking or rappelling or rock climbing merit badge in order to do endowments for that one. I don't know.
Yeah, you might have to take a shuttle into that one or rappel into it. But let's take a couple look at this. How's that for a temple? Gorgeous in Ivans, right near Tuacahn. How does that look? Does that look pretty good to you? What do you think about that one?
Is that a moat in front of it? I don't know.
Tuacahn is that famous center for the performing arts. And so, they said, hey, why don't we try a temple out there? That is one heck of a structure. Or let's go with number 3, with the Dixie. This is from that first one there, right on the top of that famous Dixie sign in St. George. How's that look?
I'm not that familiar with St. George, so these are probably lost on me a little bit. But,
Or how about in Hurricane Temple?
They're all just so gaudy and monstrous.
That is a handsome temple, though.
But it's not. It's not. I got married.
Oh, wait a minute. Look at this one. Look at that one. Now we're talking about a temple. If you're going to do a temple, that's doing it right there, Glenn. Look at that thing.
No, that's not a temple. That's from the Lord of the Rings.
It's Isengard. It's the White City.
Okay.
Or Springdale Temple, this is or the Gorge Temple. I guess this is a bit in tongue in cheek here because that's the most amazing thing is we've already got 2 temples in St. George and they're already scouting out another one here. And as we found out from the Wall Street Journal, these are like $70 million buildings and they're just plunking them down left, right, and center.
Yeah, so I guess that's the most sacred place. Okay.
I personally prefer the Isengard one myself. I think that's a good look myself. But I personally do not think that St. George needs a 3rd temple. I hardly think that they need a 2nd temple. And the church just finally finished wrapping up its Book of Mormon video series. This is a 45 episode in-depth series here, which is going to be released in 2024. And here we have it. Look at this, the title of Liberty here. Unfortunately, Glenn, that those kind of characters were not anywhere in the Americas, but I guess you can kind of just look past that if you will.
Sure.
Yeah, you'll have to look past that one. And then here's the next picture that's from the series. Again, metal plates in the New World. Glenn, we're 0 for 2. There were no metal plates of any substance in the New World. That's we're not batting a very good average here. We're 0 for 2. And same here. We have people with the steel swords and the daggers.
Are these pictures that you're showing me actually from the filming?
Yeah. No, this isn't a joke. Okay. This is actually from the film itself. Yeah. So we don't have these kind of characters. So we're 0 for 1. We don't have these kind of metal plates. We're 0 for 2. We don't have the steel swords. We're 0 for 3. Once again, the engraving on metal plates didn't really happen there, and we're just seeing a lot of anachronistic stuff here in the video series, which kind of got me going here, Glenn. I
like that picture right there with
that is nice.
The stones.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That's never how I pictured it in my mind. I don't like that there's an extra hand there. Oh, is that the brother of Jared that's like ducking down and like watching it happen? Okay.
Yes, that Moriancumer himself.
Yeah.
You got it. That really got me thinking, Glenn. I was like, what would I like to see? Because those are not the scenes that I want to see in the new Book of Mormon series. So I came up with some ideas. It's the Mormon News Roundup poll of the week. Glenn, if you would be the first person to take our poll, I'd be very grateful for that.
All right. What are the top 10 scenes you want to see in the new Book of Mormon video series? Number 1, 2000 BCE transoceanic Jaredite submarine complete with honeybees.
This gives you the general idea here where the holes should be, length of the tree, need the swarms for the bees, need the stones, and much heavier than a fowl. That's what I want to see is how those submarines work. That's what I want to see in the video series. And I bet you, Glenn, that we're not going to see that in those videos.
I would love to see that actually. That would be really. There's a lot of things from Book of Ether story that would be cool to see.
It sure would be. That's choice number 1. For those of you in the live chat, by the way, we release all of our episodes live on Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're in the live chat, be prepared to cast your vote at this time. Or is it number 2?
Alma and Amulek sitting on their hands watching women and children burnt alive.
And this is actually, Glenn, this is actually from the Book of Mormon reader, that you probably grew up with as a kid. I know I did, but this is them, Amulek and Alma. They're sitting there watching women and children being burnt alive. And he's saying, we do have the power to stop this. And the other one turns to him and says, no, I don't think that we should. And so they didn't. How about number 3?
Yeah, I really like this one. Nephi graphically decapitating a defenseless, unconscious man after listening to a voice in his head.
You like that one too. You're a fan of number 3.
I've been toying with this idea of writing the Book of Laban. That's Laban's perspective of what happened. That's kind of an alternate version of the Book of Mormon. So this one's kind of near and dear to my heart. Yeah, I came up with this story idea where Laban didn't actually die, but he kind of like followed them around and was always kind of like Machiavellian, running things behind the scenes. But I don't know. I'll have to play with that idea. But I like that one. If they depicted it in the movie, I would like to see how Nephi was able to decapitate someone, because I imagine there would be a lot of blood cutting someone's head off of their shoulders, and then putting on his clothes afterwards and passing himself off as Laban without all the blood, unless he asked him to strip naked before he cut him. I don't know. There might be some things that Nephi didn't tell us.
Well, that's why I want to
between him and Laban.
That's what I want to see in the movie. That's the entire point that I want to see this in the movie, is how did he get that done? You know, and on Infants and Thrones, you have a lot of little stories and kind of playwright sort of things and little scripts that are very interesting episodes. So I'm sure you would be really, really good at that. Okay, or is it number 4? Could you read that one for us? Oh,
Jesus killing thousands in 3 Nephi 9.
You know, he burned them all up with fire. He drowned them in the depths of the sea, the earthquakes, the volcanoes. He murdered everybody. And then the next day he came and had a nice visit with them. It's kind of an incongruous picture there, but I would like to see him doing that.
Yeah, especially if he really went up to each person and lit them individually on fire. That would be interesting to see.
Yeah,
but I wouldn't want to see that.
Now that you mention it, but maybe that was a pass. Or how about number 6? This is a good one too. Number 6.
Yeah, Shiz and Coriantumr.
Yeah, I'm really taking you back, Glenn. You remember Shiz in the Book of Ether?
Oh yeah, great. One of those things in Ether that I'd love to see.
Yeah, so he gets his head cut off, and then but he is able to rise up afterwards and kind of struggle for a little bit, even though he was decapitated. I don't know. I like the gory stuff, Glenn. What can I tell you?
And it's pretty cool, like that Ether was watching that happen, so he was actually able to see it. So it's like how many degrees of there used to be like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's also kind of like the priesthood lineage of how many generations your priesthood goes back to actually Jesus. Like so being an eyewitness, Ether being an eyewitness of Coriantumr and Shiz, and then Ether what from Moroni, and then from Moroni to Joseph Smith, and then really Joseph Smith directly to you. So it's a pretty close. It's almost like you were there seeing it yourself, but it's pretty cool. Yeah, that would be a cool one to depict. Actually,
I guess all of these are very violent, Glenn. But what can I tell you? This is the kind of stuff that I'm into. As you've, I guess I'm kind of a masochist, but I would like to see that for sure. Or how about number 6? Anything with tapers, Glenn? That's what I want to see.
Yeah, someone gave me a really nice pair of socks once that have tapers on it. It was like a novelty gift at a Sunstone once.
I do like Captain Moroni there with the steel sword. Oops.
Yeah.
On top of the see the steel sword
and the rainbow flag.
Yeah.
Like he cares.
Yeah, he's updated.
Like the title of liberty is really about like gender liberty.
On the taper is the most accurate part of this. That's what I want to see is number 6.
Yeah.
Or how about number 7?
Chariots without wheels.
That's going to be tough. That's why I want to see how they tackle that in the movie, because in the Book of Mormon, we know that Ammon was tending the sheep. By the way, there were no domesticated sheep, and also for the king's chariots, and there was no wheel. So that's what I want to see. How do you have a chariot without wheels? That's what I want to see. And this is actually from the church's own Book of Mormon reader itself.
It might have been like big skis. You don't know. It could have been big skis.
That's why I want to see it. It could be anything. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or how about number 8?
5 million Jaredites annihilated in a single battle.
The largest land battle ever on this planet, Glenn. Mm-hmm. How would they shoot that? That'd be a lot of extras. They're going to need a lot of Mormon missionaries for the extras on that one.
Yeah.
Now, how they supplied all of those folks with, with like no refrigeration and no wheel and no ability to resupply, with that many people. And it's amazing that they never found the site that took place. That's crazy. Anyway, I would like to see that's number 8. Or how about number 9?
Korihor being literally run over and trodden down by a white-skinned, self-righteous Nephite mob.
Yeah, you remember Korihor in the Book of Mormon, don't you, Glenn?
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is actually from the Book of Mormon reader itself. Here he is, Korihor, after he was trodden down, after he was run over, because his big sin was that he was just merely a skeptic. So they just ran him over. Man.
It might have been more than that. You don't know.
Yeah,
he may have been doing other things.
It could have been. That's true.
Yeah. And that was the Zoramites too, right?
Was it? I think you're right. Right.
And the Zoramites had their Ramiamptum.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you what scene I actually want. I want to see a scene of the Rammy-Anthem, somebody preaching from the Rammy-Anthem, and I actually want it to look exactly like General Conference, like exactly like General Conference, because that's what it is.
Will you be the first person, Glenn, to take our poll here? What do you want to see in the Book of Mormon, in the new Book of Mormon video series? 45 episodes being released by the church. What's your selection for those of you in the live chat?
45 episodes? Holy
yeah.
cow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to watch any of them. I would say probably of everything that you have on that list, the Nephi cutting off the head of Laban is the one that I want to see.
Well, Glenn, if that was in there, I promise you that I would watch it. In fact, if some of these were in there at all, I would definitely watch them. But if they're just going to be the tried and true Mormon fare, I'm probably going to skip it. My personal favorite here would be to see number 2 would be the one that I would want to see. How would they actually approach that cinematically? Alma and Amulek sitting on their hands, watching women and children being burned alive. I would like to see how the church would handle that. For those of you in the live chat, thanks for for casting your votes. And that does take us to our final segment here, Glenn, which is the Mormon joke of the week. Can you take us out with this?
Yeah, we're going to do a short one. And try not to laugh yourself silly over this one. Okay. Why did the Lamanites have bruised legs?
Oh, God. I don't know.
Because of all the Nephites.
Nice. Very nice. I like that one. That's very, very good here.
Yes.
So, Glenn, hey, thanks so much for coming on the Mormon News Roundup. What, you've got the Bathing with God, which is your book out there. What is Bathing with God? What's that all about?
Oh, Bathing with God is how I went from viewing the world through an atheist lens to being open to energy that is intelligent and alive that we're all made out of.
Well, that sounds tremendous. And you've also got the Infants on Thrones as well. What can we expect to see from, you started that back in August of 2012. What are we going to be seeing in Infants on Thrones? What kind of projects are you working on?
I don't know. Whatever I'm doing, wherever I'm at in the moment. I've been doing a series of conversations with a Gestalt therapist that I find really interesting. He's been going through what he phrases as kind of like an excommunication from his Gestalt therapy group where he's at, and there are a lot of similarities between the group dynamics that were going on with that group and the group dynamics that happen within the Mormon Church. So we're doing a lot of comparisons there. But Gestalt therapy is really great, really cool. So I like exploring that. I'm going to be talking with an author of a book coming up here, and Infants on Thrones is just a little thing that I do when I feel like it. So I don't know what more you'll be seeing in the future, but if you're interested, check it out.
I'm definitely going to check out at a minimum those episodes with Lars Nielsen. Very much looking forward to that. Now, as far as this channel is concerned, we're doing our year in review, the 10 most important Mormon stories of 2023. We're going to release that on New Year's Eve. And we're also the next episode of the Mormon movie reviews, which is taking place tomorrow, which is Christmas Day. And we're going to review that old LDS classic, Mr. Kruger's Christmas, released in 1980. You're not going to want to miss that. Now, I want to thank you so much, Glenn, for ruminating with me on what I call the great and spacious beehive. I want to give a shout out to Weird Alma for this episode's music. And remember,
no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. Hallowed ones maybe, but unhallowed, forget it. It's not happening.